I think the most overhyped is that you can simply take very large volumes of data and throw it at an LLM and have it actually make sense for the
Yeah.
business. It's sort of like a parlor trick. It looks interesting, and then you dig in and find out, yeah, but none of this is actually how we run the business.
Welcome to the Talking AI podcast, where we talk AI with both experts in the field and early adopters. I'm your host, Matt Paige, and we're here to demystify AI for you so you can get some value from it. Let's talk some AI.
Everyone assumes that AI will make data analysts obsolete, but what if AI doesn't replace them? What if it actually makes them indispensable? So today on Talking AI, I'm joined by Andy McMillan, CEO of Alteryx, a former developer turned product leader turned CEO, and is now steering one of the most ambitious pivots in enterprise analytics. And under his leadership, Alteryx isn't just building tools, it's rethinking what analysts do, how teams govern their data, how AI agents get the business logic right. And we'll dive into why analysts may become the linchpin in this new AI era, what skills will matter, how governance and trust will shape this future, and how AI might actually rewrite the enterprise data strategy. But Andy, welcome to Talking AI.
Thanks for having me. It should be a great conversation.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. I'm very excited about this. But I want to start with your thesis around analysts, right? Your view of the analyst role is, I'd say, contrarian to the mainstream of AI will automate everything narrative. Lay out that thesis of how this analyst role is changing and evolving in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a set of expertise that comes with how a business runs, how it adapts, how it's implemented, that often sit within these operational teams that analysts are often part of. And the way to think about this is when you want to know how sales commissions work, there's someone on the RevOps team you go talk to, or when you want to know what the audit and accounting policies are, there's somebody on the FP&A team you go talk to. When you want to understand how the return policy operates, there's someone on the merchandising team that knows that information. And I don't think that not only that knowledge, but the specificity of like, how do we want a business to run completely disappears. I think a big part of what we're trying to figure out is how does it scale better? How do you make that knowledge, that ability to work with the data be something that the AI interacts with? That's where I think analysts have this unique new role that they can be playing as an enabler to really make that happen. And I think we see that today in how AI operates. AI operates without a lot of that specificity. And what we really want to know is like, what does it mean at my company with my data when I do this thing? And I think right now the people that answer that question are analysts. And so how do we help them, sort of sit a little bit behind the scenes with AI to be the enablers of that technology to give the right answers?
You're reminding me of one of my early roles in my career. So I was at Cricket Wireless on a team of data scientists, their advanced analytics team, right? And I was working with these like super smart PhD data scientists. And my niche essentially was storytelling with the data, like pulling the insights out of the data. And I remember like there's two key things that just stood out to me. What they were doing was super advanced. There always felt like this kind of glass ceiling between what I could do and what a PhD data scientist could do. And it just took so long to actually do the things they were doing, get to the data, like you talking about, you got to talk with this team and that team and that team. Like nightmares are starting to pop up in my head from my past life there. And there was one stat, I think this was earlier this year, Alteryx ran. It said in the typical work week, analysts spend 10 to 11 hours just collecting and preparing the data, like just getting it ready to even have at a starting point. Like I'm assuming AI is going to be playing a major role in that aspect of it.
Quick break in the pod. Our State of AI 2026 report just dropped, and it breaks down what actually is changing in AI, what's hype, and what leaders need to be paying attention to this year. You can grab it right now in our show notes or at hatchworks.com.
Yeah, I think analysts are on both sides of the AI equation. So on one hand, I think giving an analyst access to AI capabilities helps that analyst move more quickly, helps them prepare the data more quickly, helps them gather the right information, maybe even find the right information. But I also think it takes the work that they do and enables it to scale out exponentially as well. So let's take a simple example. If I'm a salesperson and I'm going to close this big deal, what salespeople do is they get out Excel and they start trying to figure out what will my commission be if I close this deal. And what they end up having to do is reach out to the commissions person. They send them a Slack or a Teams message what will my commission be if I close this deal? And that person has their own spreadsheet that they're operating on, because sales commissions change every quarter. There's sales programs and spiffs and things that are out there. So someone sort of does that math. What I want to be able to do is ask ChatGPT or Gemini, what will my commission be if I close this deal? The reality is today, if you do that, you're going to get this really broad answer of like, well, here's how software companies tend to generate their commissions. And ChatGPT is going to give you this interesting long answer about how commissions are calculated. But the thing it won't do is tell you what your commission will be if you close this deal, which is really the only thing you want to know the answer to. And so how do you go to that commissions analyst and say, hey, what if you built a little calculator that you maintained that ChatGPT could talk to that would tell you the answer to the commissions question? And next quarter, when that gets updated or changed for the business, that same commissions analyst could update the calculator so it gives the right answer again. I think that separation of the technology from the analyst is important. And the analogy I use is a company's website. So a lot of people like to compare the AI boom to the dot-com boom, right? When there was an internet version of everything. And if I was in the web content management business back then, and there was this big debate, like, should IT be building the website or should marketing? And the answer became sort of both. Most large companies, the IT team runs some of the infrastructure for their website. But what we're not doing is have marketing send all the content over to the IT team that's converting it into web pages, right? The marketing team owns the message and the images and those things. And I think that's kind of where the analyst fits into AI. AI needs to answer all these questions about the business. I don't think IT is going to own the audit questions, the supply chain questions, the comp commission questions, the marketing funnel performance questions. Like, that's not what IT professionals do for a living. They're going to own the infrastructure that says, oh, we have this big data platform and we have this large language model and we have an infrastructure that makes it all work. But I think they're going to have to go back to those same analysts and say, but could you make sure it gives the right answer to commissions? Or could you have it actually encapsulate our marketing funnel or our merchandising rules? And again, that's where I think there's this sort of and answer, which is like, yeah, IT is going to own a bunch of that, and AI is going to be amazing, and the analyst is going to have a role to sort of make sure that it answers the question the right way and that it represents the business and the things they know about.
Yeah, I think that's where the analyst has that superpower. They have the business context, which is so critical in essence. But the commission example you gave, I feel like that's such a, it almost feels like a distraction. Because it's like, oh my God, I got Johnny in sales asking for what his commission's going to be again, when I should be working on like these more strategic, impactful questions in the business. So I guess essentially you're empowering others to do this in essence, right?
Well, but you could, it is a simple example, but you could also have, for example, that same commissions agent working with your annual planning agent to figure out, based on what comp plans you put in place, what your operational expenses will be. So again, you're going to have a commissions expert involved in that, but it might be part of maybe you're running scenario planning with AI. We're going to run through 100 or 1,000 scenarios, sort of like what we do with McLaren. They run thousands of simulations of every race, using data that they pull together. Maybe you're running thousands of scenarios for financial planning, which is something we don't do today in most companies. But you still need the analysts involved to say, well, this is our business model. Here's how commissions work. This is our business model. Here's how professional services work. This is our business model. These are our operating margins. Like, those are real things that exist. What you don't want to do is run 1,000 scenarios where you go, well, for a generic software company, we ran 1,000 scenarios. Like, your board is not going to be impressed with that. They're going to want to know, well, what about our company? Like, what about our margins? And every business is a little different. We've all joined a business and you come in and you think about how that industry works, and then you learn like, oh, we do this a little different, and this is interesting in our product. And so I think there's a reality that we're trying to bring to AI about how any given business operates, right? About the realities on the ground and what your policies and your rules and the things you've told your customers and how you've built your products and how you deliver your service. That, again, I think your operators, your analysts in your company are the ones who know those rules. They know how that works. How do you bring that knowledge to AI? Not just your data, but that knowledge. And I think that's the big gap. Like, I can throw all my enterprise data at Gemini and it'll do some neat things. But I kind of need the analyst involved to go like, well, here's why this is that way, or here's the version of revenue we use here, or here's why we do partial deals in this region through these partners, right? For Gemini to build that scenario planning.
Yeah, that McLaren partnership is a neat one. I want to hear about that one later. But you hit on a point though, because enterprises have messy labeling, acronyms, tribal knowledge. How do you actually help enable AI to interpret these things? Like obviously generative AI is good with unstructured data and these more kind of nuanced questions, but I'm sure there's still at times where AI is like, what the hell is that acronym mean? Like, how do you?
For sure. Well, and sometimes even like and why and when to use it. I think there's this big push right now in our industry, again, maybe to be a little contrarian around what's called the semantic layer,
Yeah.
right? Like how do you describe all the data in your cloud data warehouse? The challenge with that is it's often not the description that's the problem. It's when to use what and why, and how does the business operate. And the framing I'll provide on why this is so important that the analyst is involved in this is, I joke all the time when I go ask my analyst a question, they don't ever give you an answer right away. They ask you several questions back, right? When I say, hey, what will happen in this scenario? They go, oh, well, do you want to include this part? And what about that part? And there's a couple of deals and there's a partner in Asia that does this stuff. And do you want all that included? And so there's a knowledge about the business that isn't just a semantic description of the data. And so again, that's where I go back to how do I empower those folks to say, oh, okay, this is a repeatable thing that I see. How do I build either a curated data set or a calculator or a small agent that answers that? But I've got to apply my knowledge to it. And this is important, I have to be able to go back in and change it because nobody runs a business to keep it the same, right? I mean, I've never worked at a company where you show up and they go, everything's running great, just don't touch anything. And, the revenue will magically show up. Like you're constantly making changes and adjusting. So some of that will be things we learn from AI, but some of it's going to be, hey, we're going to expand into a new region. Well, the historical data doesn't tell us how to go into that region. We've never done it before. We need some people to come in and maybe AI is helping us make those decisions. How do we encode that logic into our systems and our agents? I think that's analysts. I don't think that's your IT team. That's going to be, hey, we hired somebody that understands merchandising in Korea and we're going to expand into Korea. And so the person we hired that understands merchandising in Korea is going to help us train the agent on how to go do that. And again, kind of goes back to my web content management example earlier of this idea of like the technology pairing with the business expertise. And the business expertise, I don't think just disappears off the face of the earth because of AI. I think we're trying to figure out like, how do you scale that differently with AI?
Yeah, and you mentioned the part about the analyst asking questions first. Like that's a great prompt hack for anybody listening. Have AI ask you clarifying questions. It just makes the response so much better. But like back in the day, I remember that same experience where I get asked for a report, I deliver the report, and that would trigger 5 other questions. And then you have this cycle of, okay, well, that creates another ticket to get that put in the backlog to do the thing, which triggers 5 more questions. And it's this long, painful cycle. So the logical thing is empowering people to do things with their own data. And you talk about building these agents and things like that. But what's the balance between empowering people versus giving enough structure to where, the democratizing effect is not counterproductive in a sense? Because I see that at times you get the shadow IT and all that kind of stuff happening.
I think it's actually a really well framed question because it is a balance, but it's also an intent. So I'll give you a pragmatic example. I care a lot about pipeline as a software company. You do a lot behind your pipeline and what visibility you have and things like that. When I joined Alteryx, I wanted to have more visibility into my pipeline by each of my sales teams in each of my regions by stage, so I could sort of see how are we doing. Like, these folks have enough pipeline to work on. The old way to do that would have been for me to go create a dashboard and then have to ask my ops teams a bunch of questions about the dashboard. Why is this red? Why is that red? What happened here, right? And instead, what I can do now is I used Alteryx. You mentioned I'm technical, my background. I used Alteryx to create a workflow to go pull my pipeline data from Salesforce out of our Snowflake database. And I could create a very small data set that did all the summarization of our pipeline. and I could talk to my RevOps team and my FP&A team to make sure like I was actually calculating it correctly. It was the right numbers, right? And there was some nuance, some very specific things that had to tell me like, oh, this is categorized weird here, but like I could build that. And it with this very clear data set that shows every quarter, every one of my sales teams, all their pipeline by stage. No extra data, no extraneous stuff, but well-defined how we measure it. And I could take that well-defined data and I can give it to a well-instructed GPT, and then I could ask it all kinds of questions. But I'm in this zone, right? I know that I'm operating on pipeline data. I understand kind of what it looks like. Again, I don't have to really understand the data. I don't have to know the table names or the column names or anything, but I can sort of go, how much late stage pipeline does my team in Asia have this quarter? And it shows me charts and graphs and it's all correct and it's got a scope knowledge. I think that's very different than when there's this aspiration of like, well, I'll just take a large language model, I'll point it at my Salesforce data and ask it questions about pipeline. Our opportunity table in Salesforce has 118 columns in it. It doesn't know how to handle that because, we've been around a long time and we've run all kinds of different things through Salesforce. And so when I create a narrow data set, it's spot on, it's accurate, it doesn't hallucinate, it has well scoped and good intention. And that GPT can be called by other GPTs. So it's not to say I always have to have a limited view, but I think the thing we've really missed is this, again, back to our conversation, this critical step of somebody who actually understands the data, building a data set that's purpose built and building a set of instructions behind it that makes sense versus saying, yeah, I've turned a large language model loose on my cloud data warehouse and now I can ask it questions about my data. When we do that, what we find is either I get garbage because I don't ask it a well-scoped question, or, and this is the hard part, I have to understand my data well enough to ask it a well-scoped question. And the reality is most people in your business aren't going to understand the underlying 118 columns in your Salesforce database to try to ask it the right questions, to tell it the right way to pull the data together. This is the analyst job. This is where the analyst comes in and goes, oh, here's how we measure a pipeline at this company. Out of this giant data set, we grab this information, we structure it this way. Here's the calculations we do. Here's a GPT that works with it. And now, to your point, I can ask all kinds of follow-up questions. I can dig in. I can look at pacing. I can look at why does this team have this? Has this been true historically? It's incredible. I spent all kinds of time in this little GPT, all saving time with my analyst. I'm not having to ping them with all these questions. But I think that's the piece we're going to get right in the next 18 months, is we're going to start to realize there's this role for sort of applied knowledge about the data. Someone who understands the business and the data, who can build, again, curated data sets, little calculators, things like that, that you hand to a large language model. And then you go to everybody else and go, hey, this agent, this GPT can answer your questions about merchandising returns or marketing content or whatever. And when I do that, I find I get really good answers because it has the context and I know the underlying data is correct.
Yeah, I love taking a meta approach when it comes to working with AI prompting. Like, if you want to get a better prompt, talk to AI about what you're trying to achieve and have it help you create the prompt. And the same, it kind of triggered in my mind when you mentioned the messy data set of 118 columns. Like, do you see AI in that role assisting as well when you're trying to aggregate data? And again, 118 columns, like the best analyst probably doesn't know all the nuance. Do you see AI as part of that kind of discovery of, okay, the best way to aggregate the data, what is interesting in here based on the outcome I'm trying to achieve as well?
I mean, I think it helps. It certainly helps. So I've gone from that pipeline to now I'm looking at marketing funnel performance. Well, the first thing I did was I went to ChatGPT and I said, hey, I want to build a marketing performance GPT. What data should I gather to do that? Now, it gave me a generic answer. You're going to want this data from Marketo, this data from Salesforce. What it doesn't know is my Marketo data and my Salesforce data and why it is the way it is, right? And again, that's not a labeling problem. Those 118 columns I have in my Salesforce database, they're all labeled well. But what I'm trying to figure out is, well, which labels apply to the business process problem of, say, our pipeline? And again, that pipeline, what pipeline is it? Is it sales pipeline? Is it my consulting services pipeline? Is it implementation pipeline? Like, what am I measuring? So there is a role for somebody who knows that about my data to be involved. AI can help me go, hey, help me build this GPT. What things would I need to go do? What's the best practice for measuring pacing? How do I make sure I bring in those other things? So it's interesting. I'm sort of using AI to help me shape up and frame what I'm going to do with that agent. I'm using AI to help me think through what data would make that agent successful. But I then still need to have a practical understanding of my specific business, not just the data, the business, right? What do my reps get paid on? How do we measure pipeline historically? Things like that. Do I include my renewals? Do I not? Is it pro serve? What about low margin things where we're selling? Like what is it? And so I think if I can combine all that, what I really want is an AI enabled analyst, right, who knows my business but is using AI to be more productive, that has a set of capabilities that they can build and importantly maintain, right? We changed the way we measure pipeline in the future. I need to go change my data curation around what that looks like, that can tell the GPT, here's the language we use at our company, right? Like, what do we call late stage pipeline? There's no definition in my table of late stage pipeline. For us, that's a certain set of stages. But if you get on the forecast call, everybody talks about late stage pipeline. So how do I tell my GPT what those things are, right? And give it the tools to interact with my data in my business the way that makes sense to me. And AI is part of that, but it's not the whole thing. And the problem, this is that whole, we've had this knowledge management conversation for 30 years about like, how do you take the stuff that's in people's heads and put it in your systems? And the reality is like, I don't know that you ever get there. You try to enable the people that have the knowledge to put it into systems. Again, I go back to, I think that's the analyst. Like that's the person that knows that.
Totally. One of my favorite things from this year was Dharmesh, CTO at HubSpot. He said at the beginning of the year, 2024 leading into 2025. So this is the year, 2025 is the year of AI agents. And he just came back, a month or so ago and did the same speech at their annual conference. And he said, I was wrong. This is not the year of AI agents. This is the decade of AI agents because it is so emergent. There is so much potential for this. And there is a very long runway of what is capable. We're still in its infancy in a sense. And I've heard you mention several times agents, kind of agentic workflows, GPTs. What does that look like in the world of Alteryx today? And where do you see that evolving? Because it is still very new and emergent.
Sure. We talk quite simply about sort of 3 stages I think we're going to go through. The first stage is just automation. The reality is part of the challenges with AI is there's a lot of things in a company that today are not automated. It's really hard to take something that's manual and scale it into an AI universe, right? So I think we're going to go through a period of just what can I automate? I'll give you an example and we can sort of use the example as we go through the 3 stages. So imagine your budgeting versus actuals process, right? So the end of every month, you're an executive, you get your budget versus actuals. This was my budget. How did I do? In a lot of companies, that's still quite manual because companies run a bunch of different systems, right? Through acquisitions, different geographic systems. And so often you have some sort of partner on the finance team that literally is using an Excel spreadsheet to grab your budget and your actuals. They're in 2 tabs and they're running your budget versus actuals, right? So if that's the way I'm operating, I'm not going to build an agent anytime soon that gives me real-time budgeting information because I can't even do BVAs in an automated way. So a lot of what we help companies do today at Alteryx is automate that budget versus actuals process. We'll connect to whatever system the budget is in, whatever system the actuals are in, and do that process. Well, now that I've automated it, so that's step 1, I can start to bring AI into that automation. So one of the things I might do is use AI in that actual reconciliation process. So what things don't reconcile? Are there free text forms? Like, can I use AI to just make that process better? I think more interestingly is imagine at the end of that process, instead of giving you, let's say you were the executive I'm supporting and I'm your FP&A person, instead of giving you an Excel spreadsheet that is your budget versus actuals, maybe I give you a report that AI has run that tells you, hey, here's your last 12 months of BVAs. Here's where things have changed. By the way, I've looked at things like travel and expense externally. I can tell you that airfares are up 10% globally. Here's how you're trending. Like, I can do that today really well with AI if I give that agent the budget versus actuals data in a very clean way, right? Again, back to the point earlier, I can't just ask AI, how am I doing on my budget today? It doesn't know anything about your budget unless you prepare the data for it. But if you prepare the data for it, that's pretty interesting. So that's step 2, is sort of applying AI into that automation to sort of give you analysis, to give you better context. And I think that's quite useful. I think the 3rd step is where we get to true agents. And I think your point on like, it'll take years to get to this point, but I think some companies will get there quite quickly. Once I have that process both automated and I'm using AI, Why am I waiting till the end of every month to run that budgeting process? I could have an agent looking at my budget in real time. I can have an agent notify me, hey, Andy, flight costs seem to be trending up and the predictive markets think fuel expenses going up and you've got travel planned in your budget. Should you buy your airline tickets now? Like, that's really quite helpful. But that's really moving to this idea of, again, sort of agentifying the experience. Even in that world, I still go back to, like, I have a budgeting process that exists. I need somebody who understands budgeting to be doing my budget versus actuals process. And so there is still a role, I think, for the analyst to be sort of shaping how all three of those steps work. And I think today, so, if I'm listening to this podcast, I'm like, well, okay, that's an interesting future. What do I do today? I think what we've been telling people is you can start getting ready for this and start doing this now. You can start building automation into your workflows. Most people have access to some kind of LLM today in a corporate approved way. So start thinking about how do you create data assets that you can bring into that environment with good prompting and get to that level 2 pretty quickly. And then I think that sets you up for that sort of agentic future as we start to say, okay, well, now that I've got automation and I'm using AI, how do I start to get more predictive in real time and really start having AI give me that information? But all of that to me is really based on helping the AI actually really understand my business and my goals and the context around it. And most of what I see from people today when they give me some kind of AI demo is that that's missing, right? It's help me rewrite this email, tell me a little bit about what's going on with this customer out in the world. And that's all great, but that's not my budgeting process, my sales comp process, my merchandising process.
Yeah, and I love the term agentifying. I think we'll coin that right here. The act of deploying agents.
Yes.
But do you remember, I don't know if you were a big Seinfeld fan, but all the time I always go back to this scene where Kramer was doing movie phone and George is calling in.
Yes.
It's like, and then he's like, why don't you just tell me what?
Exactly. Exactly.
It's the same kind of thing. It's like, if AI doesn't have the context, I mean, it's almost like this helpful assistant or, intern that just does not want to be wrong. It's going to guess. You really have to kind of push it there in a sense. But
it's going to guess with confidence. That's my favorite part
thing.
of AI is it guesses with confidence. Yes.
And I always say my 9-year-old daughter about to hit double digits is getting very good at that, giving me, plausible answers that sound good, but are they real? I don't know. She's getting very, very good at that now. And AI is the same way, which gets back to this concept of hallucination. And there was I think it was a month or two ago, OpenAI came out with a report on hallucinations, and that they found the issue was dealing with incentives, right? Because AI is incented to provide a plausible answer that sounds good. But if you change the incentive to not try to, provide just any answer, but the correct answer, and then it leads it to saying either I don't know or asking more clarifying questions. And it's the same concept of like, if you're in school, they always tell you to bubble and C, right? Whether it's right or wrong, just answer C.
Right.
Versus like the SAT, you get penalized for providing the wrong.
Right.
It's the same kind of concept, and it's just a very nuanced thing that people need to understand as they're interacting with AI, especially with data, because it'll sound good.
Well, and I think it's one of the. I completely agree with you. It's one of the things that we work a lot with the Office of Finance, and I joke a lot with the CFOs that we talk to that AI is probabilistic, and the word probably in the finance department is not super popular. Like you can't say the financials are probably correct, will probably pass audit, this is probably GDPR compliant. Like these aren't things that work well in finance. And so it doesn't mean you shouldn't use AI. It just means, to your point, the instructions have to be different. And also the data set has to be clear. So when I build a GPT with data that I'm using, I give it very clear instructions that for these calculations, you can only use the data that I am providing. And then it will tell, sometimes you can bring in other data for these other things. Like in your analysis, you can use outside data. But when you run the calculations, you have to use the data provided. And to your point, that's a very big difference. Now, what becomes important is the data provided correct, right? That's the other thing. I mean, how many of us, my favorite, in addition to whenever I ask ops a question and getting questions back, is when people put up a dashboard, but then proceed to tell you the data is probably not correct, right? So I think that's also, you gotta get to that sort of clean, honest version of the truth, right? Yeah. But I think if you do that with AI, you can be clear. You're right. You can give it clear instructions. You can tell it accuracy is important, and you can tell it, I want you to work within the data set that's provided. And now you've got a tool where you're using deterministic underpinning logic. Again, budget versus actuals is not a probably process, it's a deterministic process. The analysis, what's driving my cost to go up? That's where probably is pretty good. Like, I wouldn't mind an analysis where it says, here's what's going on in the world, here's what might be happening, here's things to ask your head of sales about why their costs are going up. That's all worthwhile. But you're probably going to be within budget is not the way to answer the am I within budget at the end of the month.
Yeah, it's such a nuanced point there. You know what else is probabilistic? Humans. Like we're probabilistic as well. I think sometimes, and of course, in the finance point, I think that's where the nuance comes into play, because a lot of people, it's like so binary, like AI is good or it is bad, it's helpful or it is not. And I think you have to put it relative to humans, and then what question that you're asking it is such an important thing. But I'm curious, take me back to, you've been in this role as CEO with Alteryx for a little over a year now, like past executive and product and things at Salesforce, Oracle, user testing and whatnot. I'm curious, like you came into this role, how did you think about the strategy of Alteryx and where to take the company? Because so many companies we talk to, ourselves included, it's driving change across every organization. It's that transformative. How did you think about the strategy and how to leverage and where to take the company? So I'm a strategy nerd at
It
heart.
was no, it was a bit of a strange one for me. I don't know if it's a repeatable strategy for everyone. I was at user testing before I came to Alteryx, and one of the things that we did was we really embraced ChatGPT early. We put it on everyone's, we gave everybody access. We started building custom GPTs. We had hackathons. I thought it was quite interesting. It was a business that was quite qualitative. So user testing is a platform where you record, we ask people to record themselves giving video feedback of using designs. So very qualitative. And again, AI is great at that. So we kind of leaned in heavily. One of the things I found in that experience was it was really bad at answering specific questions about our business and really bad at working with our data. And so when I left user testing, I'd sort of run its course for me and I was ready to go do my next thing. I actually thought I might start a company that solved the problem of bringing enterprise data to AI. So while I'm working on this idea, I get the call about the Alteryx job. And it was a little bit of a eureka moment. It was like, oh, like, I know Alteryx, like, of course, like this is the product that solves this problem. They've been doing data prep for 20 plus years for all the large companies. Like, this is it. We just haven't yet applied the technology to this problem. And so, whereas normally you show up as the new CEO, you come into the business and you're sort of trying to learn the strategy and what are we trying to do. I very much came into the business aligned with the board to sort of bring a strategy into the company that I sort of showed up in my briefcase with the strategy of like, this is what we're going to go do. And that's been really fun. And it's been really rewarding. The customers have really reacted well. I think the employees are excited about the mission that we're on, but it was sort of something I had a passion about before I even got connected with the company. And then the idea that there's this like massively scaled, $1 billion annual business that has the tech to solve this problem. As a product manager, I'm kind of passionate about the problem. And so that was exciting.
Has your take on strategy changed at all with the advent of generative AI? Like a lot of people talk about AI wrappers and it's just, destroying modes and all of these things. But do the principles of strategy change? Is there any nuance to how you think about strategy that is different now than it was pre 2022?
It's great. I actually really like that question. I would say two things about it that I think are quite different. One is speed. I think the speed at which you can do things now is fundamentally different. The speed at which you can write code, the speed at which you can generate content. I think the things that used to be slow in a business, AI helps make fast. And so I'm a huge believer in the theory of constraints. I run every business I run almost entirely based on the theory of constraints. And what's interesting about AI is I think it takes a bunch of historical long-running constraints in running a software company and completely flips those on its head. So that's fascinating to me and really changes the strategy of how you operate a company. So that's sort of one. I think the second is maybe unique to the software industry, but the software industry has been entirely about how do I take, in many ways, sort of human nature, you're right, which is probabilistic, and turn it into deterministic logic. So for 30 or 40 years, we have written billions of lines of deterministic code. Some things are deterministic. A lot of things that we wrote software around are not. And so one of the things I'm fascinated about is what areas are we going to completely rethink what we do with software based on sort of adding this entirely new set of capabilities. And I don't think it's one replaces the other. I think there's this like, how do you bring these things together? But there aren't a lot of companies today that are well suited to do both of those things. So I think we sort of have a whole industry of people that wrote last generation's logic. And now we have a whole set of companies that are like, oh no, we're only going to do this probabilistic thing. And again, I can think of entire software products where whole departments aren't going to go, probably is not the right answer. But bringing these things together, I think, is incredibly powerful. And I don't think that strategy has completely shown itself in a lot of organizations yet. And so I'm really interested to see when we figure that out, how fast we can go with software.
Yeah, I love your point on the focus on constraints. And you're probably familiar with this book, The Phoenix Project, and that trilogy of books. But like the bottleneck, there's always a bottleneck. It may shift somewhere else, but there's always a bottleneck. And I think AI is potentially changing where that is in essence. But I'm curious, like a big thing, especially with our clients, it's always the build versus buy equation. In my mind, that has changed in a lot of ways because you can now build things much easier than you could before. But at the same time, in my opinion, it's completely flipped on this. I used to be like, oh my God, everything's democratized. Why will you ever buy, name your SaaS product, Salesforce, whatever, again? But my feelings have evolved on it in terms of, but do I want to build it? Do I have this nuanced domain expertise when it comes to, your CRM, your HRIS? Or does it still make sense when you consider the trade-offs to just, you buy a solution? So I'm curious your take. How do you think that build versus buy equation is changing? And where does that come into play for Alteryx, when clients are considering, what things do I build, what things do I buy, and whatnot?
I think it's going to shift pretty dramatically. It doesn't mean all those platforms go away, but I think it's going to be a lot easier to build. It's going to be a lot easier to maintain. Even that knowledge, a lot of people say, well, what do you know about building a CRM? Like, go ask ChatGPT about what it knows about building a CRM. It's pretty incredible. Now, I go back to our first part of the conversation, which is, I don't want to build a generic CRM. I want to build something that works for my business. So then the question becomes, if we pick on Salesforce, can Agentforce come in and understand my business fast enough that I go, great, like that's the right answer? Or not? Do I need to build it myself and then have my analysts have it understand my business? And I don't know how the chips shake out on that yet. I think that'll be sort of interesting to watch. I do think the whole build versus buy thing I find fascinating, even how we build. I mean, historically at software companies, one of the biggest constraints was how many engineers do you have? Well, now if engineers could be 10, 100 times more productive, what's the new constraint? Is it how many designs do I have? Is it how fast can my team collaborate? Like I wonder about, large, scaled global development teams. So they need to be closer together because they're iterating quicker. Like I think how we build software will change, what we build software for will change. And I think how software providers show up will change, right? So, it's not fair to say, well, Salesforce from 3 years ago be the answer in the AI area. Like, well, probably not, right? But does Agentforce on top of Salesforce get me there faster? And if speed is important, is that the answer? I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to watch.
It's funny. Yeah, you mentioned the constraint is it no longer on the developers. I think it was Andrew NG who mentioned he's seeing a constraint move to the product side, to where the developers are moving so fast. It's almost like the product people cannot keep up. So it's kind of an interesting thing he noticed. But like on the side, that's my favorite thing to do is just to build things on the side. Because I'm traditionally a product person, background in data, but not building full scale web apps. I love building stuff with Lovable and Cursor and these things. Like the other day, I built one at 3JS on Lovable, and it leveraged your camera in 3JS to build a 3D model of particles and things to make shapes, and you can adjust them by moving your hand. It's just like it's mind blowing. In a few prompts, you've created this thing. So it's totally cool. But so Alteryx you just had a big release recently. And I was reading through it before I jumped on. There's a lot of cool stuff that you all have released. What's the highlights for you? And are there any teasers you can give us leading into 2026?
Yeah, there's really two big themes in the release that I think are really exciting. One is sort of continuing on our Alteryx One path. So for those of your listeners that know Alteryx well, for a long time we had a desktop product, and then we rolled out a set of cloud products a couple of years ago. We packaged them as separate products initially because we thought they were different users. And what we found out was our existing users were like, "Hey, I need those cloud things
Yeah.
too." And so Alteryx One is really taking all of those investments and bringing them to our user base. And so there's some really cool things in this release around things like live query, where you can be using a cloud data platform and you can be working with, millions or billions of rows. And Alteryx is perfectly happy to push that down into the cloud data platform and see what's going on. So sort of some really cool bringing together the power of what IT is deploying with sort of the end user friendliness of what Alteryx does for line of business. And then the second is around AI. We launched two really cool AI capabilities just last week. One we call our Gen AI tools. So you can take whatever LLM your company has approved you to
Yeah.
use, and you can drag that LLM into an Alteryx workflow at any place that you want, give it instructions, and have it interact with your workflow. And then the second is we launched an Alteryx Copilot. So when you're in Alteryx, you can slide open this Copilot and simply type in what you're looking for it to do. I've been blown away what this Copilot can do. We do these online challenges. We've even been asking it to solve some of the online challenges. And our Copilot will literally put the tools on the canvas, test that it works, iterate on the results, which I think is just, again, a way to help our analysts and our users just go faster. So when you're trying to figure out how to do something in Alteryx, you have this Copilot that can help you actually try different tools and validate the data. So I think both of those are really interesting. And when you combine those two, it's really about how do we help our user, who's that analyst, connect to these massive cloud data platforms now and get a lot more value out of them, both using AI and using the value of those platforms. So yeah, it was a pretty big release. Lots of good stuff.
There's a lot of good stuff there. So to wrap us up, just a couple of rapid fire questions. I'm curious. So look forward a year from now, 2 years from now. What will analysts spend 50% less time doing, and what will they spend more time doing in this future that's coming in the next couple of years?
My hope is that they're spending less time on the one-off repeated questions. And what we're actually doing is having a clear ownership of some of the data and the logic that represents the business that AI depends on. So you now own the budget versus actuals process, but AI uses that all over the place, but you still own the process, or you own that calculator that calculates sales commissions, and you know that it's used in financial planning, answering sales questions, working on deal management. So I think it's really carving out that space where analysts realize I have a role to play, I have a set of expertise, I have a canvas I operate on, and that the thing I build is deployed in a way that the agentic world takes advantage of.
All right, give me the most overhyped promise in AI right now, and what's the most underrated thing with AI?
I think the most overhyped is that you can simply take very large volumes of data and throw it at an LLM and have it actually make sense for the business. It's sort of like a parlor trick. It looks interesting, and then you dig in and find out, yeah, but none of this is actually how we run the business. And so I think that's the fallacy. I think the underhyped thing is it's not really that hard to do a little bit of data prep and get it right.
Yeah.
When we have customers go in and say, hey, instead of giving it again 118 columns, I ran a simple process and I gave it 15 columns and told it what these 15 columns were about, you get great results. And so I think we're going to find pretty quickly a pragmatism that arrives, and people say, oh, I get it. Like a little bit of work to make my data make sense, and AI is quite valuable. And I think that'll be exciting when we get to that point.
And last one for you. Does AI make finding the signal through the noise easier, or does it paradoxically, this access to more data, this ability to do more, we hear the notion of AI slop and whatnot. I think it applies in data as well. Does it make it harder?
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah.
That's actually an interestingly framed question. I wonder how much are people generating AI slop reports to have AI summarization happen, and like, what are we really doing here? The flip side is, when I use it in a well thought out way, I get a lot of value for how I'm using AI to do analysis. I bring together, like, for example, I bring together all the data from my board decks. We have an internal non-training version of an LLM, and I can use it to interact with it to go through and troubleshoot what's my board going to ask me about, what strategic questions am I missing. I think that's really quite interesting. So, I wouldn't use it to generate all my board content yet, but I certainly think it's great to interrogate it. So I think when we use it the right way, it's interesting. When we use it the wrong way, I just don't think we get a lot out of it. So it'll be interesting to see where the trends take
Yeah,
us.
it's funny. I was just talking to an executive at a company right before this, and he was mentioning that like he can now, and a lot of people can. You can kind of tell when something's been AI generated, a report or whatever it may be, and there's almost like this mental switch. It's like, oh, okay, I'm not gonna, read through this, or I'm not gonna give it as much credit in a sense. So there is that element at play, I think, at times.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that, and people do notice it. I sometimes notice it positively when I feel like someone has taken what might have been 3 pages of content and turned it into a page and a half that's concise. The opposite is sometimes somebody gives me a 10-page report and I'm like, they've got a page worth of ideas and they've just created AI garbage,
Yeah.
right? So again, how do we train people and how do we operate to sort of use this in a way that's advantageous? Why someone sends me a poorly formatted 3-page report that isn't summarized in the age of AI, I have no idea. So maybe this is something we're going to end up sort of teaching people how to use and having corporate culture around and what are people doing with it. But we're not there today. So it's pretty interesting, both good and bad, what you
Yeah,
get.
I mean, I think that's full circle for the conversation today. Maybe that's the analyst that helps with the signal through the noise in a sense there. But Andy, this has been an awesome discussion. Where can people, obviously Alteryx is a pretty well-known name, but where can they learn more about all of the new and cool stuff that Alteryx is doing?
Yeah, a couple of places. The website's always a good starting point. We have a world-class community as well. We have hundreds of thousands of active users. You can go to community.alteryx.com. There's a really nice blog post from our CPO sort of walking through these new features and capabilities. We're also happy to connect with people on LinkedIn, and we have a very lively kind of Alteryx community there as well.
Nice. Andy, thank you for talking some AI today.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Talking AI podcast. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. We love those. For more info on Talking AI, visit talkingaipodcast.com. The single biggest mistake we see companies make with AI is they don't properly train their teams. We see it all the time. Companies roll out AI tools and expect people to just figure it out. But using AI effectively requires a totally different mindset and skill set. And that's exactly why we built training for every level of your org, from AI training for teams and executives to training engineering teams on our generative-driven development methodology. Or if you've already identified your AI use cases and want to just prioritize where to start, we offer an AI roadmap and ROI workshop to help you build a clear plan. It's all about going from we should use AI to actually driving real value with it. Head over to hatchworks.com to learn more.